Hello, welcome to the Student Learning Support Services English Language Support. My name is Lauren, and today we're going to talk about compound sentences, or how we join two independent clauses together. Now, if you haven't already, it's important that you watch the first video in this series, which is clauses and sentences, to learn what the building blocks of our sentences are. Compound sentences are sentences made up of two or more independent clauses. Now remember, our independent clauses are those that contain a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. I went to the football game. This is my first independent clause. It's got a subject, it's got a finite verb. Remember, that's our verb that belongs to a tense in went, and it's a complete idea. I know where I went to the football. The second independent clause is my favorite team lost. Again, this could stand as a sentence on its own. If I cut it off from the first part, my favorite team lost contains a subject, my, and it contains a verb, lost. And that's a complete thought, my favorite team lost. Now, what I'm doing with this compound sentence is I'm putting them together because these two ideas are very closely connected, right? So rather than having one sentence followed by another, I'm putting them together. And I'm doing that with these guys here, the comma, but. And this is called a conjunction. I'm going to talk more about these in just a moment. So compound sentences, or two independent clauses, can be joined in a number of different ways. The first way is with a coordinating conjunction. That's what we just looked at with that comma, but. The second way is with a semicolon, and the third way is with a conjunctive adverb. And we're going to talk about each of these three things now. So let's start by talking about our coordinating conjunctions. Our coordinating conjunctions are those little words like but, for, so, and. There's a very handy way of remembering what these are. It's the acronym BANBOYS. And each of these words is used to show what the connection is in the two clauses. So when we're using the word for, we're showing reason or cause. For example, the computer wasn't on for it had crashed earlier. When I'm using and is to highlight something in addition. For example, the computer crashed and I hadn't made a backup. Nor shows a negative statement. So the PC wasn't unplugged, nor was it dead. But shows opposition or contrast. So the computer crashed, but I had a backup. Or highlights alternatives or choices. So for example, the computer crashed or I unplugged it by accident. Yet shows contrast or exception. So for example, the computer's light was on, yet the screen was blank. And so highlights a result. Like the computer crashed, so I used my backup. You're all probably very familiar with these words and use them all the time in your writing. But one question ask when they're using them is, how do I know whether or not to use a comma? So remembering from our last video, an independent clause must have its own subject and verb. So in the case of compound sentences, we are joining two independent clauses. That means they each have their own subject and their own verb. So coming back to the example from last time, the authors disagree on the first idea, but agree on the second. In this case, do you think this comma should be here? Well, the answer is no. Why? Because I do not have a second subject. However, when I say the authors disagree on the first idea, but they agree on the second, I've introduced a new pronoun. So even though, again, it's technically the same subject that I'm talking about, it is a new subject according to the kind of grammar of the sentence. And so in this case, I do use a comma. And again, I can fix the first example by removing that comma so that it becomes a single independent clause. So that's what you need to keep in mind. Do I have two subjects? Is there a new subject on the other side of my conjunction? If so, then yes, I can put a comma in. Now, just as a little aside, sometimes when we're joining very short independent clauses together, we sometimes don't put the comma in. And look, this is again one of those flexible rules of grammar. Chances are your tutor won't even notice if you're doing it. A prescriptive, which means taking the rules very seriously approach to grammar, would tell us that this is wrong, but it's actually something that's becoming more common. So if you forget your comma when you have those very short, simple, independent clauses, it's okay. But if you want to follow the rules, now you know them. Now, the next way that we can join two independent clauses is with a semicolon. And we do this when there's a very clear connection between the two clauses. Otherwise, I would suggest just making them two simple sentences that are next to each other. So in this case, Kiko is a great student. I'm reading her essay. Yes, I have two independent clauses. I have two separate subjects, two separate verbs, and they both contain a complete idea. But in this case, that idea is not necessarily as clearly connected as it could be. And so in this case, it might be better to have them as two simple sentences. If, however, it was written as Kiko is a great student, she has written a brilliant essay, the connection is clearer. Why? Because I'm keeping that subject the same. There's a clear, logical line of a progression of an idea. So when you're using your semicolons to join your independent clauses, it's important to consider why this is your choice of thing to join them together. And if you're doing it just for the sake of it, maybe consider whether or not these would be better off as two simple sentences, or if you'd be better off using a conjunction or a coordinating adjective. And also, semicolons are something that cause some students a lot of stress, so don't panic because there is a whole short video coming on what to do with semicolons and how we use them. The third way that we can join two independent clauses together is with a conjunctive adverb, and you'll see these quite commonly in academic writing. For example, Mike is a great student. However, he needs to spend more time organizing his time. In this case, the conjunctive adverb is the word however, and you notice that it's surrounded by a semicolon and a comma, and it's joining the two independent clauses together. Much like our conjunctions, we use conjunctive adverbs to show a clear relationship between the two independent clauses, and we use these when we maybe want to be more specific or formal to really clarify those relationships. So instead of and, I might use furthermore, moreover, in addition, in fact, or indeed. Instead of but, I might use however, nevertheless, or nonetheless. And instead of for, I might use consequently, therefore, or as a result. Another thing to keep in mind is that we can use conjunctive adverbs in other ways. They're not always necessarily used to join two independent clauses together. You can, however, punctuate it like this. Now in this case, the conjunctive adverb is coming in the middle of another clause, and so it is surrounded by commas. What's really important to keep in mind is that it is not the conjunctive adverb itself that determines whether we use a semicolon, conjunctive adverb, and a comma. It is the type of clause that we have and how we are using that conjunctive adverb. So therefore, it's important to consider your clauses. And as you can see in this example, I'm using it at the beginning of a sentence. Therefore, I don't need a semicolon. So that's just something to keep in mind. And that brings us to the end of our module today. So to summarize, a compound sentence is made up of two independent clauses, and we can join them with a coordinated conjunction, a semicolon, or a conjunctive. And that is all from me. I will see you then.